It's like crazy to me that there is still a new person, not just new, like many new people per day.
Yeah,
we're like, who is this guy?
Yeah, I know, right?
And you're like, wow, it's just interesting. You're like, I've been doing this for so long. Like, if you were to ask me, I would have tapped it out. And yet, I see in the data every single time there's a major news story that we gain a ton more audience. Here's a fun one for people to know. The day of the Ukraine war, the day after, we acquired 55% more of our audience.
Jesus Christ.
55. So the vast majority of the people who currently listen to my show
came after Ukraine
as a podcast came post-Ukraine. Imagine that. I mean, that was only a year ago or something, a year and a half or so ago. And I guarantee you, we're in the middle of Israel-Palestine. I guarantee you that there are hundreds of thousands, and I can see them, who they are, who are joining right now, who had never heard of the show one time before this. And then the same thing is going to happen in the 2024 election. The same thing happened in Afghanistan. The same thing happened during the midterm elections. It's just how it is.
Last time I did this was 1 year post-Breaking Points. Now we are 2 years post-Breaking Points. What's the vibe check?
Ooh, vibe check. Well, new studio, which you've been a great help with, new graphics, more guests. I guess you and I are talking in the middle of like a heated war. So in some sense, things are exactly the same. And in some sense, things are completely different.
I mean, we've talked about this a bunch of times regarding your time at Hill versus now, but what's your ownership level sensibility difference when it comes to taking the channel up to 1 million, which you did 2 times?
It's totally different. I mean, I just think that I think what people who watch your channel are people who are creators and people who are self-owners. And I think what we all need to understand is that there is a very big difference between working for somebody and building something and actually running it yourself. I don't just mean emotionally. I just mean at the very like nitty-gritty level. I mean, you know, Sagnik, like developing systems for publication, developing editor workflows, hiring staff, making sure that your things are working properly. You eventually find yourself like the CEO, and Crystal and I are like the co-CEOs of like a small business, but also a major media corporation in some senses when you consider the numbers. And so we have workflows, we have like best practices, we have staff, we have more than a dozen people at a time who are working, who are touching the product. We have, you know, schedules, we have, God, you know, I mean, people out there, business, accounting teams, like multiple people on payroll. So it can be very overwhelming if you think about it that way, but you have to break things down into little chunks. And I think the key is not one thing I just mentioned has anything to do with content.
That's
so
great.
That is all the backside of the content.
Both sides of the brain. Yeah. That's fascinating. Okay, going back to content, I'm 27 years old and you are 31, 30. So like most of my friends in the news who are a couple of years older than me, if I ask them, why did you get into news? The most common answer is 9/11, Iraq, or like the United States' reaction to both of those things. And I think you fall in that camp as well. Like your interest in news, in journalism kind of like comes from that news cycle. Compare that to what you have now covered, which would be Syria, Ukraine, and now obviously what's going on in the Middle East. What did you observe during Iraq, like people being fed this narrow diet of mainstream media, which you are now trying to remedy in your coverage?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think what the U.S. public missed the most during Iraq is dissent, and then the critical question of what next. And then after what next, I always say, and I didn't coin this phrase. This is from Ryan Crocker. I had a meeting with him once. He was the U.S. ambassador to Iraq during the surge. And he was like, 40th order consequences are real. And you have to think about what you're going to do and what things look like whenever you invade a country. But it's not just invasion. I think about that with war. I mean, you're sitting, behind these are a lot of my favorite books. I really only would put the ones that I love the most behind me. And really, I think it's just been like a lifelong investigation of like that very question of like, what does it mean? And so, yeah, it's actually very interesting to consider and to think about that. I also thought about it. I think about it too in terms of like, what would have I wanted to hear or know or thought when I was 17?
All right, let's answer that. Let's answer that. What would you have preferred?
Yeah, I would have. I mean, at that time, by the time
we have hindsight,
we were able to ask that question.
Totally,
but 2003, like I remember it vividly. I actually remember 9/11. It's probably one of the foundational things that I remember the most. I was like 9 years old. I remember the exact day. I remember the moment. I remember watching the tower fall. I remember the day after, like completely vividly. I remember complete like picture movie memory of the invasion of Iraq. I could tell you everything about that day, the headline, talking about it in a 5th grade class, all of that. So 6th, 7th, 8th, kids, teenagers trying to digest this, knowing people who are getting deployed, hearing stories about people's siblings getting killed in Iraq, then Afghanistan, and all of that. I think the critical question at that time was, when you're just ingesting like mainstream media, it's like, why are we doing this? Eventually, 2007, 2008, 2009, we start to ask very critical questions and acknowledge that the thing was a failure. But those first 2 years, I grew up in a town where I grew up in the district that George W. Bush was from, right? Like Crawford, Texas was literally, I mean, it was a religion to support Bush. And I remember it very well, unfortunately. I don't think that stuff exists anymore. The media monolith, the media culture, I don't think that exists anymore. I think there's always going to be kids who are like, well, I read this online. And we're like, oh, I saw this on TikTok, or I saw this. I mean, in that sense, getting more information it's never been better than today.
You said asking questions. A lot of people who know you from Breaking Points or The Hill think that your quote-unquote breakout moment was starting Breaking Points.
Oh,
but like in my opinion, it would be when you were 25 years old. We were co-workers at the Caller, and you got the White House correspondent gig.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, you're 25 years old, sitting next to Acosta, asking questions to Sarah Sanders. Talk to me about what are your key like lessons from being in the system and asking the question, especially now that you have the advantage of hindsight of being outside the system. What did being in the system teach you?
I think the system perpetuates itself. I think it's a self-obsessed, it's narcissistic, it works for each other. I'll tell you the fundamental lesson I learned, and I think this is why I did well at the White House, is I said, I'm not going to ask questions for all of my colleagues and for other people in the media. I'm just going to ask questions either that I'm interested in, or that my editors are interested in, or the people who read our paper are interested in. That was it. And I just picked up, it takes 1 week to pick up. You're like, why are you guys all asking the same thing? And you're like, oh, you're all just trying to impress each other. Well, why are you trying to impress each other? Because you all rely on each other for reputation and for employment.
It's a club.
And so it is a club, but in the worst sense. And so you're like, wait, but none of you are actually working on behalf of the people who watch your show. So what's happening here? And then you deconstruct that and you're like, well, how do you do that? You're like, well, just don't act like everybody else. That's it. You know, what is it? Zig when everybody else zags? Like, it's not that difficult. But it does take a lot of social pressure because you become an outcast very, very quickly. It's intoxicating to be beloved by like these so-called like titans of Washington media, and you kind of have to like self-check yourself every single time. I basically just didn't care. I was like, well, I don't actually care what any of these people think about me. I was like, and also if I did, then I would just end up like them. And I'm like, they're all pretty miserable. They're all like, you know, well into their careers and they're still doing the same job. So I was like, you know, one of the best pieces of career advice I ever got was, you should look at the career that you're in. Look at the people who are a decade ahead of you and just be like, do I want to be that person? And I was like, I don't want to be this person. This is a terrible gig. And so you were like, well, how do you get out of it? And so I think most of my career since has been trying to work away from that. And the reason why is, look, I'm not denigrating it. It is a cool job. The problem with the White House, or honestly any real press corps job, is you work at the mercy of the institution. You basically are a glorified employee. You only see what the White House wants you to see. You can try your best to worm your way in, to get sources and leaks and all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, they control whether you see the president or not. Even same with Congress. I mean, on Congress, you can run around Capitol Hill, you can stick a camera and a microphone in a congressman's face, but you're at the mercy of what that person is going to tell you. And I was like, this just seems like a really bad way to get information. And I also realized, I'm like, for a lot of people who are at home, that's not the news that they want. They want to understand what the hell is going on. And that's actually a much more meta question.
Speaking of someone who is like a decade ahead in timeline in journalism from you, would be like, let's say hypothetically, I don't know, Chuck Todd, right? Chuck Todd during Ukraine, like the entire DC press corps was getting their news from Chuck Todd on his couch, just telling people about what to think about Ukraine, right? So during, like, of course, Breaking Points and Kyle Kulinski and all the independent shows have insane reach with, for lack of a better term, normies. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas like the mainstream media has influence on the people who make the rules. Correct. And actually have it, like an influence.
That's
in the
their
system.
power. Yeah, that's their power.
That's their power. Like, is there a feeling of like helplessness? Like, even though you have like this reach, you can't, quote unquote, as of now, just like affect big change through like the administration. How does that make you feel?
I don't think people should think that way. I just think we're going to do the best that we can. And you know, here's the main thing. It depends on the type of impact. If you want to impact policy, then yeah, you shouldn't do what I do. if you want to help impact like people who are going about their lives and thinking about, I find that far more rewarding, to be honest. I mean, I find it way more rewarding that people are like, hey, like I listen to you on my way to work or when I'm driving for Uber Eats, and it really just helps me like understand what's going on. I find that like far more edifying than, oh, you know, something you said was appreciated by the White House. I've had that happen to me before. Guess what? Doesn't really matter.
That's fleeting.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of like, you know, like the war coverage time, right now, obviously, when you turn the TV on, you realize what the value of live breaking news is, right? Mainstream media has kind of an unfair advantage, which is having the access.
They have
like
money.
Yeah, like they're operating as economies at scale, so they can like shell out money for people to report from the ground, whereas independent news sources are kind of left sieving through Twitter and dead babies are not dead babies, hospital blown or not hospital blown. How has this time been for you in terms of like covering the news?
You could say yes and no to that, because what I would say is, sure, it's true that CNN and Fox and everybody else has people on the ground in Israel, but are they on the ground in Gaza? No. It turns out we're all sifting through the same amount of information. There's only two organizations with people on the ground, Western media organizations-ish. One is the BBC, the other one is NBC. And then Al Jazeera. That's it. Those are the only three like English language journalists that are actually on the ground inside of Gaza. So does it really mean anything that somebody is 50 miles away and sitting in Tel Aviv in a studio? Or maybe it's all just a little bit of a show, because the truth is that we're all sifting through the exact same information at the same time. I will say, like, look, there are certain examples where that isn't true. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, Clarissa Ward from CNN International, I think she did a very good job covering that. But those are very far and few between. Ukraine is the perfect example, actually. Yeah, listen, you can go sit in Kyiv, but here's the truth. You're hundreds of miles away from the front line, and we're all sifting through the same Telegram videos because you're not actually there. And I think there's a flattening to the news that people who are in international news and major media don't want to acknowledge. They're getting the same news that we are from Twitter, from direct on-the-ground sources, or from Telegram, or from anybody else, or from official statements that are put out there. So their advantage is not nearly as big as it may seem. Most of it's just a show.
Speaking of like Twitter, obviously in the Western world, Twitter is like the source for like this is the wire basically. And right now it's kind of a different place than it used to be back in Ukraine because of like quote unquote engagement farming. And I will name drop. I don't care. Like I'm like Ian Miles Chung, whatever. Like those kind of like those kind of people, like who are just like obviously they want money from their engagement or whatever. Right. Like what kind of system does it create? And like what's your take on like just being a newsman and like just scrolling to the wire?
Yeah, it's just made it far worse. I mean, I'm just speaking just from that perspective. Is like removal of headlines was a disaster because of the wire service nature of Twitter. Having like these aggregator accounts where. This is the bigger problem with the aggregator accounts like you're talking about, like Ian Miles Chong or other. They're like reported by, they have no news judgment. They're just pure regurgitating. They're like, Hamas says X, Y, and Z. I'm like, dude, you got to fucking couch that, man. You got to be like, hey, you know, Hamas, but in the past, like they've completely lied. And, you know, I even see the new trend is to aggregate news, not link to it, and to include an image because all of that increases thing. But sometimes they'll use images that are completely wrong or they're stolen. They're from Syria. They're from the wrong conflicts. It's just making the completely... Anyway, it's been much more difficult to sift through what is true and what is false. So I would say that the engagement farmers are like the bane of my existence, especially because I'll see them come and, you know, people send it to me like, is this true? I'm like, I don't know. Give me 20 minutes. You know, I got to go and sift through it and what they said and this and that. It's just, oh God, it really is. It's been a bit. And look, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's for the best. It just leveled the playing field completely. Now you don't believe anything that anybody puts out. Honestly, that probably is for the best because it probably was like that already. But purely from my job perspective, it's definitely made it worse.
Now the veneer has come down. Last question on this beat. I don't know, it's kind of a stupid question, but like, how are you doing? What does it feel like to like go through? Like, are you numb to it? Are you just have this immense responsibility to bring the news so you don't like let it affect you? Like,
I think I am a mixture between numb and I also just know that, and I even said this on the show, not one word. I could start crying on the show. Yeah. It would not have any impact on what's going on in Israel and Gaza. Yeah. You know what will have an impact is making sure that people who need to understand what the hell is going on can take a little bit of when they're sitting at lunch with their friends and somebody brings it up, that they can say, well, I think X, Y, and Z based upon, what I heard and this, and this, these pieces of facts and this context, and maybe help them understand and think about things a little bit better. That's all I can do. That's it. And so, yeah, just focus on your job and do it that way. You getting emotional is not going to help anybody.
Let's go back to 2010, which was the time when I came into journalism. I'm pretty sure you were in college. And there was this thing called the Great Awakening, which was the UVA rape story, followed by Ferguson, followed by Trevor Martin. And you can like keep drawing that timeline up to Trump, which basically like signified the point in history when like white college educated kids got interested into this whole anti-racism, anti-discrimination in a quote-unquote post-racist society. What effect did that news cycle, that time, have an impact on how you view politics?
Oh, I mean, it was huge. I actually think UVA Jackie, that story, might be one of the single biggest impacts it ever had on me, because I was like, I believed it 100%. We were in a fraternity. It was supposed to be one of those like great change moments. We're like, oh my God, like frat culture, it's so bad. You felt sick. I remember talking about it with some of my friends, and someone was like, hey, that story is total bullshit. And I was like, what? And then this was like maybe a week later, and we started looking into it. We're like, oh my God. And that's when you're like, oh, well, this is actually the second time this happened. What about the Duke lacrosse story? And that's when you're like, oh my goodness. Like, wait, so people can just straight up lie and get away with it? And then, yeah, I mean, it started spiraling from there. I have a friend who thinks that Coney 2012 was actually the genesis of all of this, which there is a good case. I mean, that pretty much broke everybody's brains. That's the first time that you had like mass social media delusion. Trayvon Martin was the year afterwards. Ferguson was the year after Trayvon Martin. 2015 was the mass first like BLM protests, and then you have the Trump election in 2016, which absolutely that's when it went totally mainstream and things went absolutely insane. Basically, things have been insane ever since. So yeah, I mean, me personally, it just really what it was is I already was like, I didn't fully trust like institutions, but that like broke all my trust in media completely. Where I was like, I do not believe. Like, if I see a story like this, I'm like, I don't believe it. In fact, my default is I'm like, this is a hoax. I'm like, you got to prove to me this is not a hoax. And yeah, it's like that with. It's just been vindicated too. Right? How many so-called stupid incidents are fake? Are just like completely fake, and it happens all the time. So yeah, Jussie Smollett is like one of the most famous ones. But the real thing about Smollett is about how many times it happened in the past, and the media never reported on it. It's like I was like, I knew about all.
What effect do you think that have on like the culture writ large? Because obviously people, like, when that was happening, that became the default culture for people of my age group.
Yes.
Like college educated, coastal, whatever. Like that became the default thing to believe in, and if you were to question anything, then you are quote unquote kind of like messing with equilibrium.
I think it's sad. That said, I actually think there's far more people on the other side of the equation who don't believe it. It's really only college-educated white people who are the most believing. Most people, regular people who go about their lives, have a very deep distrust of the media. They don't trust institutions. Institutional trust is near an all-time low. Most people, their default, I wouldn't say it's like, I don't believe it. They're just like, I'm a little bit suspicious. We'll see how it shakes out. One of those things. So, I mean, by the way, I don't think that's a good thing, but that's the media's fault. That's nobody else's fault.
Staying on this culture beat, obviously this last year, I think this summer, there was this, I don't know, let's say Barbie on the progressive side.
Right.
And the other side, you had Oliver Anthony, you had Tried That in a Small Town.
Sure.
You had so many things. What do you think right now is the state of union of all things culture v counterculture in pop culture?
I don't think we have a culture. I just think we have the internet, and I think everybody's on the internet. And it just depends on which part of the internet that you're on. And so depending on that, like, things are gonna go viral. I will defend I think Barbie is far better than
Barbie's a good movie. I'm not saying of course. They're not in the same category. No, they're not in the same. I'm not saying Barbie is an actual piece of like art. Let's say whatever. It's a good movie, but it was hailed as the progressive movie. Whatever.
Yeah, I guess. Although I
don't get it. But like the progressive took it as their thing, and like whatever.
I just think it was fun. It
was a fun movie.
It was a fun movie, especially fun to watch if you're watching the right crowd. So I just think that I saw a tweet once which was like, how do you explain everything that's happened since 2005? And someone just replied, internet. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And I was like, that's the correct answer. It's just everyone's on the internet. The internet dominates everything, every culture, every spread, everything about the flash in the pan. It dominates the way that it dominates all of mass culture right now, which is why there is actually no such thing as mass culture.
In the same culture beat, I mean, you can obviously overanalyze things like Oliver Anthony or Bud Light or whatever these phenomenons are. Cancel culture was always like, people thought that was a thing for the left, and now the right actively takes pride in quote unquote participating in the culture and taking down certain aspects of it, be that Bud Light, be that pushing Jason Aldean, be that pushing Oliver Anthony and then pulling him down or whatever. What do you make of the whole phenomenon?
I just think it's a natural cycle. Like, the internet gives people power. People are going to use that power to the best of their ability. No, most people don't really believe in principles or free speech. They really just believe in like accomplishing like their
Team sport,
own
yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fine. I just think people should be honest about it. And I mean, I think it's unfortunate, to be honest. But look, I just think all of this is about trying to feel powerful. And most people in their everyday lives don't have sources of power. Most people have less friends than ever before. Most people hate their jobs. There's like a poll where like something like 70% of people like hate their boss. Most people hate their jobs, they hate their boss. At best, they're like just surviving. They're not able to achieve a lot of personal agency. And the more that you have that, and then you have the outlet of the internet is just going to reflect the fundamental desire of every human being, which is just to be free and to control their own destiny. So I think that's probably what it reflects more than anything.
So you brought up boss, and you had a time when, you had a boss, you were part of the DC culture and whatever that means. And once you left that system, you actively realized that you are going to lose friends, be that,
sad.
I know, like be invites and stuff like that. It's sad, but also like you gain other things.
Sure.
Like, you got your foot into the, like, let's call it the internet entrepreneur club.
Right.
And the creator economy and the tech friends. Some of them are mutual friends of ours. What do you think is like the prime mindset difference of people operating in the DC versus people in the creator economy, tech, entrepreneurship, that cycle?
The biggest difference is that DC is obsessed with DC, whereas while I won't say that other of these creator things and all these other aren't insular, there is an acknowledgement that there's somebody on the other side.
Interesting.
Whereas Washington is only obsessed about Washington. They don't care necessarily about the policy that is impacted by Washington. Or if they do it like in a selective basis. Whereas I think tech people, for example, are obsessed with the product. And yes, they're obsessed with themselves, but they're also obsessed with the way that people use their products and their impact of their products and of their entrepreneurship and of their companies. You can't reach $1 billion valuation if normal people don't interact with that company, or at least once upon a time you weren't able to do that. I think that's still probably mostly the case. So same with my show. Like, you can't do a show that is big if people don't watch it. So that means that you fundamentally have to be thinking about, who are these people who are watching it? What do they want? What are they getting out of it? People who do videos that are popular fundamentally understand something that a lot of people want. And so it's a mindset shift and a difference in terms of impact, and it's customer focused. I mean, actually, I think that's the biggest one, is that Washington is like a service industry for themselves. Everybody's just like, oh, how is somebody going to get a job, or this, and this, and oh, you were here and you weren't there and you were seen in this, but none of it actually has anything to do with the people, like I said, on the other side of the camera. Whereas I think for tech, me and other people who I've like connected with more recently, our singular focus is not what's going on right here. It's behind that side. It's like, who are you? What do you want? How can I best help you?
It sounds super commonsensical, but it's like such an active first principles way of thinking. Like, it doesn't matter if they are not there. And that applies to tech product, and it applies to you.
Let's put it this way. If you work in a nonprofit, you literally, why do you care about other people who are, you don't have customers. Your customer is a single billionaire. As long as that guy cuts you a check every year, it doesn't matter what you do. And that's actually liberating. There's definitely something to be said for that. But that's basically what DC is. Like, if you work for a faceless, multi-billion-dollar corporation, who gives a shit what the viewers of NBC are? You're like a part of a conglomerate part of a holding company. K Street. Like, you're totally removed. And that's a good thing in some respects. It's not always a good thing to be like hyper attuned to your customers and to other people. But for me, I'm like, the biggest mindset shift is almost everything that happens here and all the clubs and all this other stuff is completely irrelevant.
Irrelevant. Yeah.
Irrelevant to business, to the way people are living their lives. And it's like, the reason I had to quote unquote break away from the system is I don't think I could do my job effectively if I was even still tangentially. Because then your phone starts getting called, hey man, I didn't like how you said that. I'm like, I can't be having that. I can't be having that in my ears about lobbying interests and different interest groups and, oh, what happened to so-and-so used to say things this way. I was just like, oh, I can't have that. It screws it up. It screws with the product because I know what people need. I have to be able to do my best for them. It's a different sense of service.
It sounds so like anecdotal, but it's like I want to like double click on that because like especially like Crystal is like a couple of years older than you, and like she was already such a big part of. She ran her own campaign, then she worked at MSNBC, and she did all that, and you were in the White House and stuff like that. Two people who you would assume that would just like keep on going in the autopilot,
which is way easier,
and make good money, and that's a good living, and like you're quote unquote being of service because you work in capital J journalism, so you feel good about yourself as well. Like taking the risk of like, yeah, you can think about, oh, I start a company, that's a risk, but like actively kind of like out of the system.
Well, yeah, when you fall hard because nobody's gonna be there to save you. Whereas like if
they will just like tell you like I told you so.
Instead. Most people are rooting for you to fail.
Yeah,
that's something you should understand very deeply if you're gonna get into this game. Is most people don't want to see you succeed because it's a direct reflection on their life, and that's also another thing you really discover who are your real friends. People who genuinely just want the best for you and are like happy to see you doing well, and then people who are like bitter and angry that they just didn't have the wherewithal to try and do the same thing. Yeah, listen, I mean, look,
you don't have to. It's fine.
And I always tell people are like, hey, should I go independent? I'm like, well, like honestly, probably not. Like, I don't think you're gonna do that well. And more importantly, it's like, bro, you got a good thing going on right now. You got a W-2 income. Let me tell you something. It's nice. You know how much time I spend on accounting? A lot. Like, it's not fun. I spend hours and hours of my time with accounting and taxes.
I want to zoom out and show the table.
Yeah, it's just like oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. I've got financial documents literally all over my desk. It's not fun, like to deal with all this stuff. For me, it's worth it because I like being free. Most people don't want to do that, and there is nothing wrong with that. Nothing. Please let me implore you, which is that this needs to be something you believe in so much you're willing to deal with the bullshit, not the other way around.
And you also should have a proof of concept.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you better have a good product, a very good product. Some people are like, should I start a podcast? I'm like, on what? And they're like reacting to a TV show.
Oh, boy.
I'm like, well, but there's like 5 that already exist. One of them's been going for 10 years. So why are you better than that person?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, my friend and I thinks we have funny to say. I'm like, so you think you're better than that person? Because if I mean, listen, maybe, but maybe not. Probably not.
Also, do you know how to deal with copyright? Because that's what you do if you do a Reacts channel.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just like all these little things that nobody thinks about. It's like, what about footage? And I can tell you the exact. Yeah, I can tell you all the ins and outs of fair use laws.
Oh my god,
all this other stuff. Again, which most people don't want to think about. But you have to because it becomes a part of your business.
The last question on this beat would be, I mean, it's been 2 years. So are you? And you told me previously that like you want to get to a point where you are just doing the content.
Yeah.
Because that's when you realize, like you do the clutch thing, which you're clutch at, right? So it's been 2 years. You have hired plenty of people. You have contractors and all these people. Are you excited to go to a place where it's just you, your brain, and a blank piece of paper and the camera?
Well, it'd be exciting. Yeah. I mean, I'm closer to that than I was a year ago, and I'm way closer to it from the day that we launched. And yeah, every day that we get closer to that, the happier I am, because it's just, look, the news, I mean, I don't want to sound conceited, but like, it's not hard for me. I like it. This is what I do. I'm good at it. I know I am. I've got a good skill set. I know that I can break things down for people. I naturally like to read stuff like this anyways, and that's what I would probably be doing in my free time. It's all the other nonsense that I don't want to be doing and dealing with, that now I don't have to deal with.
I mean, news people are like such a like different kind in this sense, because like if people don't know, most journalists get paid jack shit.
Yeah,
and they do it because of their quote unquote love for news. And I think like, I know we shit on like the industry or Washington or whatever, like that's something which is pretty romantic, and I think like should be like talked about like, altruism or whatever here.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not. Yeah, everyone's like, "Oh, you got it made." I'm like, dude, I'm like, no offense, I'm like, I probably work like way more than you do. Just hours and hours and hours. And I discovered when I first started doing television is I came up with a rule called the 30-to-1 rule, whereas I think it takes 30 minutes of reading to back up
1 minute
of
talking
television.
Yeah,
1 minute. And you may think that's crazy, but Just try and think. If anybody who's out there, you're an expert in something. And when somebody asks you a very basic question, think about the amount of reading, knowledge, and background that it takes for you to think about everything that you know, distill it, filter it, and then answer that person's question in a cogent and a quick manner. Because people's time is the most precious resource that there is. Think about how difficult that is. And that's why I still stand by the 30-to-1 rule. I think for every minute of content, for every minute of something that you have to say, you need at least 30 minutes of preparation work.
And like your preparation is something which I want to talk about, not only like, because obviously like you read and all that stuff, but it shows in other aspects, which is you might think that it is anodyne, but like you being hyper obsessed with suits and ties.
Oh, sure.
And how you look and stuff like that. Like someone could look at it and like call you like, I don't know, like narcissistic or like men's fashion guy or whatever. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, like it's like the quote unquote respect for the audience.
Oh, absolutely.
And when
I hear it from them. That's the thing. I hear it from them. They're the ones who tell me the fact that you dress this way helps me be able to send it to my parents.
Yeah.
This isn't, look, yeah, I like it. I've actually come to, I didn't start out like this. I've come to like it. But what I've realized is I'm like, I'm doing this and it is helping them share the content with somebody else, or it makes them feel good. You know, people come to my shows wearing suits. People literally show up to my live shows wearing a suit. And then actually they're like, oh, I never would have bought one or thought one if it wasn't for something that you talked about. Because I'll talk about like principles or whatever, like how you should dress, etc. And like, I'm like, that's, listen, you don't have to listen. That's another, people are like, oh, your show has gone off the, I'm like, don't watch it. I don't care. There's plenty of stuff out there on the internet. I'll be fine without you, with or without you. But I think people don't like to hear that.
But no, the point,
they want to think that you.
But the point being, like, there is like so many things which people, like the chimpanzee brain, registers right away when you see a clip, which was such a big part of like your redesign for the channel, because you want people to realize that this is as good in terms of news value and looks and production. But at the same time, the core of it is anti-establishment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, correct. That's everything they were going for. That was the whole design process. And yeah, I mean, that's another thing. People are always like, will look at it or how small critiques. I'm like, I didn't have to do this. Like, the studio, it's like, you could have just sat on it. It cost a fortune, just so everybody knows, like an actual fortune. You know why we did it? To make the product better. Yeah. Like, could have just sat on my ass and we could have just like kept things going. That's what most people who work in this business do. Once you hit it once and then you just stop improving from there. I don't have to be hiring people. I don't have to be hiring camera guys and going out, and I don't have to be redesigning my graphics. Like, I don't have to be doing partnerships or waking up on Saturday, early to sit with Crystal and sift through the news of the Israeli. I don't have to do any of that. I do it because I know that we have a service, to provide to people, but also because I understand that for them, this is not just something that they want to see static. They want to see it grow and do it. And so, anyway, it's one of those where it takes an immense amount of work. And if you're going to get into this, again, people who are watching yours, like, you really got to know what you're signing. And I'm not even, I actually think people should steel-manned and dissuaded before they're encouraged. Yeah. I'll encourage you once you've been through this.
And then learn. Find
mistakes. You better learn.
Let's talk YouTube media news, and let's get as niche as possible. YouTube is obviously an advertising business, and now you know it because, AdSense and whatever. But at the same time, there is this realization that when anyone makes their first YouTube account, let's just pull up an incognito account and make a YouTube account. The first things which YouTube recommends are just like mundane, anodyne, Mr. Beast, I don't know, like music videos or sports highlights or whatever. Netflix. Yeah. The point being, like news stories for an advertising-based company is obviously in the risque territory.
Yeah, it's funny, people are like, wow, you guys must make a ton of money on YouTube. I'm like, what are you talking about? I've told people who have similar channel sizes to me what overall CPM is. Like, that's the lowest CPM that I've ever heard. And I'm like, yeah, it's because we work in the news and because people want to put their ads on dumb videos. And look, I actually love Mr. Beast videos. Let me tell you, I am an absolute sucker for the $1 versus $100 million concept. I hope he keeps doing it. I love to fly. His plane episode was awesome. That said, that is a very specific type of content, which is geared towards retention and advertising, where you can charge $20, $25 CPM because it's not going to offend everybody. Well, talking about Israel-Palestine is the definition of offending people. So it is what it is. You're just not going to make a ton of money in this game if you're working in news and you're relying on advertising on YouTube in terms of algorithmically placed ones. That's why the bulk of our revenue comes from premium subscription, and we don't really care as much about YouTube.
Oh, okay, so follow-up question on that. should like, okay, so like I know people at YouTube, I know people on YouTube who are channel partners and work in the news vertical or whatever, and they are like hyper passionate about, oh yeah, news should, like YouTube is where news should be. If you want to do an independent news, let's do it here. It's like, okay, but then like you have to pay people and like carve out ecosystem where they feel sustainable.
Don't blame them, okay? They probably believe that. I'm saying it's a very basic business reality. And listen, nothing you and I are saying is ever going to change shit because this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. If YouTube itself, I forget what their overall revenue is, it was bigger than Hollywood. Like YouTube is the biggest video platform on earth. You and I are like footnotes to endnotes to like bookmarks.
If they decide to nuke independent news, it would probably mean that they would have to stop selling kombucha in their whatever. That's literally
it would mean nothing to them. And that's why you should operate in terms of it's not personal. They're just doing their job.
Yeah.
So you need to do your job. You're doing your job within a system. It just is what it is. You just need to decide that.
It's a reality.
I don't even complain about it.
No, it's
I'm
fine.
just like, it is. I don't care. I used to complain about it because I used to get mad. I'd be like, hey guys, sometimes the news is bad. Like this is really annoying, or this and this, and they're always doing the same thing. They're like, look, we're doing our best, like this and this. They believe in news. News actually is big on YouTube. It's just that it's still so. Also, here's what people forget: YouTube is a free product.
Yeah,
but they do have customers. Do you know who their biggest customers are? Hollywood. Yeah. Okay. Nobody thinks about that.
Oh yeah, like ABC,
movie
and
trailers.
NBC. Yeah.
25% of YouTube is movie trailers.
Okay.
Freaking like watching Netflix trailers for different shows that are coming out. Start to think about that. That's who actually pays their bills. So why do you think that stuff gets recommended? That's what people gotta reverse engineer it. Like I've got business incentives, so do they. Yeah. They've got stuff that they gotta push out. They've got CPMs that they gotta hit. They've got ads that they gotta sell. They've got inventory that they need to fill. Like once you put it all in that perspective, it actually helps that I run a business now because when they say that stuff, I'm like, yeah, I get it. So, all right,
like it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah.
Like, speaking of YouTube, someone who was like a juggernaut in the YouTube sports space was Pat McAfee.
Yes.
The Pat McAfee deal, anyone can like choose to like gloss over, not RIP because it's technically still on YouTube. But now ESPN cut out. It's not exactly a acquisition. It's more of a, I don't know, like
it's a licensing.
It's a licensing because like then you get to show Pat McAfee on ESPN while Pat McAfee is also on YouTube. You just have to like stop dropping the F-bomb.
Yeah,
now and then, and you get like over 10 mil, I guess, a year. I want to focus on that because like what happens in sports, I think sometimes permeates to the news world.
Definitely.
Yeah, like what do you make of that whole thing?
Well, it's smart in the sense that Pat is a great acquisition for them. I said RIP just because I know a lot of people were like, well, is he going to remain true? Like, is he going to remain real? Like, how is it all going to go? I mean, for now, he's fine. The big question is what's going to happen the next time there's like a Brett Favre situation? Like, what's going to happen the next time there's like a major situation with China, like that tennis star, Peng Shuai, who was like allegedly raped by one senior member of the CCP. I'm like, you gonna cover that on your show? Because like I don't think you are. And I think in the past you might have. There will come a time where something will come in conflicts because sports is inherently political, unfortunately. But that's just kind of how things go, especially in our modern environment. And I'll be very curious to see how he plays it. That said, I do think he's the most talented. By the way, I don't even watch sports, but I know enough to watch him to be like, this is one of the most talented men that I've ever seen. Him and his team, they're so good at what they do. So in the long run, they're gonna be fine. They'll be fine. The content is still great.
Yeah, like just to like answer your question, like I watch sports and I love sports and like I know like the main like value prop of Pat McAfee is like it's almost cliche to say like guys like to hear things from like other guys who just look and feel like it's like talking to your guys at the bar and like that's literally it's not rocket science. That's exactly what we get when we watch Pat McAfee. And yeah, like probably like for the 40% of people who would like, okay, fine, I'll watch him on ESPN, whatever. But for the majority, 60% of people, they get the value. Oh, Pat, he's on YouTube. I can just turn on anytime and watch it. And they
watch it on your way home from work.
Exactly.
Whatever. Yeah.
And in that same vein, I think what happened with the Portnoy situation, vis-a-vis like him, quote unquote, buying the back company for $1 from Penn, not to like overanalyze it, but the main thing which my takeaway is like this whole thing of independent media source news getting acquired by quote unquote mainstream companies or betting companies or whatever. It's never a happy marriage.
It will never work. It's just not possible. The Barstool brand is just not something that can be connected to something that is mainstream. That's why they are the way they are. That's why they're great. That's why I messaged my friends who work at Barstool. I was like, hey, congratulations. I'm happy for you. And they're ecstatic. they're looking at it as a victory because you can only be who you are and build this pirate ship brand if you're going to remain a pirate ship forever. And unfortunately, especially for him and for Portnoy, is like he was getting dragged into all of these nonsense things regarding gambling regulations. It's just like, fuck that. You cannot be connected to that, to a larger entity. Same with, that was my worry about Pat, is I'm like, bro, you ain't working for ESPN. You're working for Disney. You're working for the Disney Corporation. The Walt Disney Corporation is arguably one of the largest I think it might be the largest media holding company on planet Earth. You've got business interests. If he says something bad, they can retaliate against Disney Shanghai. That's a whole other level.
Like that's a domino
yeah,
falling on.
Like,
you don't even know.
He wouldn't even think about that. But I know that because I've read a lot about Disney. It's like and that's just one thing that I'm talking about. We didn't even touch on ESPN, ABC Sports, licensing deals, connects to the NFL, connects to the NBA, which is an international audience. It's like, man, you have no idea where you're getting.
On the other side of the coin, it's obviously like if you want to have your own pirate ship, independent is the way to go. But like, let's think about it. So like when Barstool got acquired by Penn, I have friends at Barstool who even got fired, and they for a fact know that the company got like insanely bloated. Like anytime a company gets acquired or being ran by,
that's what they're dealing with right now.
Exactly. So like when you're independent, yes, you get your independence back, but at the end of the day, it comes back to first principles. Like what exactly do we need to be who we are? Do we need like they fired this podcast called like the Mean Girls Pod or whatever? Like
they sucked.
So like
sorry, no offense, but you're
I don't celebrate layoffs or whatever. But like when like the theory gets proven right, I was like, see, like that's what it is.
I think that's a good thing actually. I think people should be. One of the things I hate most about like corporations or government or anytime you work in a big thing is just a lot of superfluous bullshit. One of the things I love most about being independent or a small business is just, look, it's a lot of work. Like, don't get me wrong. But also, like, when something needs to get done, like, we just get it done. There's no questions. I'm like, listen, we're going to Atlanta. We're doing a focus group. What needs to happen? X, Y, and Z. Okay, here's the money. Get done. It's done in a week. It's like, that doesn't happen. If you're in a major media corporation, like 3 people got to sign off on it and this, and what about this, and this guy wants to go, but not this guy. It's just like, it's nonsense. It's too much. My biggest fear is getting big in that way. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with HR. It's like a nightmare. It's like so-and-so is pissed at so-and-so. Even now when that happens, I'm just like, figure it out, okay? I'm like, I don't care. Figure it out between the two of you. Or one of you don't come back.
Okay, let's stay on it for a while. I'm pretty sure in these 2 years when you have like seen this astronomical growth, I'm pretty sure you've had offers to go big or go bigger. Be that acquisition, be that acqui-hire, be that whatever. When one of those things come across your table, what goes through your mind?
It's easy because you just come back to freedom. You're like, is it going to compromise freedom? If yes, then no. It's just like and I've had major life-changing sums of money like dangled in front of your face and you're like, no, well, it's just not going to happen. Because the thing is that how could you then face the same audience while you violate the principle? It's just not going to happen. It's not possible.
No, finish that thought. Violate that principle. That's the main thing.
That's what I mean, like, how could I in good conscience, nobody's going to acquire you so that you can just leave the next day. You'd have to keep doing your show for let's say 2 or 3 years. It's like, well, how could I do the same thing for the same audience and be taken like a massive corporate checker? Change the way that you do your show. It's just not going to happen. So, like, look, people signed up for a show because they like it, and if that show's going to change in any meaningful way, especially violations of like the principles or the idea that I wouldn't be able to just say whatever I want to say, then it is not up for negotiation. Like, period. So when you come at it from that way, and also I believe in the long run, if you operate that way, you'll actually make more money. It makes more business sense.
Why?
Because more people will continue to sign up, and they'll know that you said no to this, and this, or they'll see that you have had many opportunities to do things differently and you didn't take them, which means that they'll continue to sign up, they'll continue to share, they'll continue to trust you, they'll continue to share it with their friend, uncle, business, whatever. And in the long run, you'll actually be bigger, and you'll make more money. You'll be worth even more if you stick to that.
You told me this thing which stuck with me, which is like the internet is so big and so small at the same time. Like you think that internet is small because like you have a nice little corner in the side, but like when like you get this like overwhelming like proof of concept from people like, hey, we do give a shit about this and we are willing to shell out money for you, that's when you realize like how fucking big the
internet is massive. I learn it every time that there's a major story, and our audience, we acquire a lot more audience. I've been doing this now for 4 years. It's like crazy to me that there is still a new person, not just new, like many new people per day.
Yeah,
we're like, who is this guy?
Yeah, I know, right?
And you're like, wow, it's just interesting. You're like, I've been doing this for so long. Like, if you were to ask me, I would have tapped it out. And yet, I see in the data every single time there's a major news story that we gain a ton more audience. Here's a fun one for people to know. The day of the Ukraine war, the day after, we acquired 55% more of our audience.
Jesus Christ.
55. So the vast majority of the people who currently listen to my show
came after Ukraine
as a podcast, came post-Ukraine. Imagine that. I mean, that was only a year ago or something, a year and a half or so ago. And I guarantee you, we're in the middle of Israel-Palestine. I guarantee you that there are hundreds of thousands, and I can see them, who they are, who are joining right now, who had never heard of the show one time before this. And then the same thing is going to happen in the 2024 election. The same thing happened in Afghanistan. The same thing happened during the midterm elections. It's just how it is.
Yeah. Okay. So like, let's jump that.
Cool,
yeah, I know. Let's jump that. So like we think that news is a tough business because it's cyclical. Like you're in the doldrums sometimes. You don't know like when it's.
That is true.
Yeah. It is true. It is true. But like the reason why you got 50% of the uniques post-Ukraine, and now that's going to same thing happen with Israel and then 2024, is because when these big things are happening, there is a narrow set of elite takes which people are getting on TV or mainstream or whatever, and they need something.
Bingo. Usually what it is like somebody at a table or a friend or a lunch will be like, hey, what the hell's going on, man?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you should listen to the show. I've listened to it for a long time. Like, okay. I mean, that is the gold standard of advertising.
Organic share.
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
If you get that, like, you're gold. And that's what I rely on. I don't spend $1 on advertising. I just rely on people. I think sometimes I have heard recently, ever since we started charting in the top 10, that when big news will happen, people will go on the top 10 and look and see who they should listen to.
Okay.
But you have to make it obviously to the top 10 first. But I think since then that I can't prove it. I do think it probably helped a bit.
No, okay, so let's stay on advertising for a second. Like, what you're talking about is, that iMessage link. Like, hey, you should listen to this.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
it's
my
like,
goodness.
that is, I mean, you think like the YouTube recommendation algorithm is the god, but at the same time, like, when you get that, like, that is the main thing. Like,
YouTube recommendation isn't shit. Like, think about how many times that you've gotten a recommended video and you've just clicked out of it, or, I mean, I've gotten there are probably some that I've watched and I just didn't think about it. But like, if somebody tells you to watch something, like, you're gonna watch it, man. Like, if you have a good friend and they trust you and they send you a link, like, I'm watching that link. That's a whole other level. So I rely on that more than anything. Just people spreading the show.
Yeah. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit. I mean, I see you obviously as a journalist, but I obviously see you as someone who kind of witnessed the change in work culture and actively realized that in their career, right? There's a lot of things happened in the last 2-3 years, like be that work from home, be that COVID, be that people kind of like rethinking like what their life is regarding, like is work my life and all that stuff. And you talked a lot about these things in terms of like, people moving from LA or New York to like much more chill places, be that Austin or be that whatever. I want you to verbalize if someone who is 20 years old or 22 years old is coming post-college into American work culture, what is the world that they're inheriting?
You're in a very changing landscape. And what I would tell them is that it's great for people who are later career to work from home. But when you are in an early career, I would go to the office as much as possible and I would try and be social. A huge amount of people make friends from work. That's one of the best ways to do it. It's how you find other people that you can relate to. That's how you can hang out with others. And it's one of those where don't give that up just because you can sit in your bedroom and hang out with your friends from college. You're actually not moving forward. You're moving backwards if you do something like that. So my biggest advice is just meet as many people as humanly possible. And if you're really good at your job, you're going to meet a ton of people. And you'll expand your social circle, and it'll be a lot of fun. That's my biggest advice. Is the biggest mistake I see people make who are young is they just hang out at home. They'll work from home 5 days a week. They'll go into the office once a month just because it's easy. I agree, it's probably easy. But put yourself in a situation where you got to meet other people. It's the best thing that ever happened to you.
That's specific to the work culture, but I want to talk more about like the world writ large, because which you talk about a lot in the show regarding, like houses are expensive, like jobs don't pay as much, you're drowning in debt and stuff like that. It's kind of, again, like you shrug your shoulder, like it is what it is kind of thing. But at the same time, I want to talk to you about it because like you kind of like crystallize like that world that they're coming into, and them just having a 50 grand paycheck out of college. It's fine. It's good. It's a step into the world, but you have to be conscious of like the quote unquote forces that you're playing against.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard.
I'm asking you because you once had that gig.
Yes, yeah,
Pre-COVID.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I think that the biggest thing you can do is if you want to achieve freedom, you have to do something which is extraordinarily unique. You have to take a big risk, and you have to work very, very, very hard at it. And that's not the only way. You can do it in many other ways too. But the best thing you can possibly do is to be prudent and to not try and keep up with the Joneses, is to target where your money is, where it is going. You need to be very intentional. You need to have a plan more than anything. Don't just drift through life. Don't go to a bar and buy X amount of drinks just because it was fun. You should go in with a plan. You should be like, I'm going to have fun. I'm going to buy 3 drinks or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just set goals, little mini goals for yourself, and make sure that you're not, basically like, don't make money happen to you. You need to happen to you.
Okay,
Does
bars.
that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's like a very, because that's how you end up broke. And that's how you also end up in a situation where you're like, I've got a ton of student debt, or I'm 35 and I don't know what I'm doing, and I've got this balance on my credit card, and like, what about a house and all of that? You can still make it happen. I'm not gonna say it's easy. It's actually very difficult. But if we can't change the system together, we can't change it on an individual level. And on an individual level, like, it is still possible. You just have to be very prudent. So be prudent.
Okay, cool. Let's stay on money. How has your relationship with money changed in the last 2 years?
I have to pay quarterly taxes. That's pretty annoying. No, really what it is that for businesses, I'm like, man, this whole system is fucking rigged. Because you're like, you'll go to your accountants and be like, so what do you do? And they're like, well, like,
QuickBooks.
No. They'll be like, well, like, you can do this, you can do this, or you can do this. You have to decide.
And that's what I have to pay you? Yeah.
No, but you start to realize, they're like, well, if you do it this way, then you don't have to pay this way, but you have a risk of this, this. And you're like, what? Like, this, I'm like, I'm just trying to like follow the law. Like, how do I just do? And they're like, well, it's murky. And you're like, oh my God. So like, people who run a business, I just run a small business, okay? We don't have shit. I can't even imagine being a major corporation. If you're running a major corporation, tax law is like completely fake. It basically is whatever you want. You can just guesstimate it. The IRS, if you're a multi-billionaire, is not coming after you.
Yeah.
Pay enough, and they'll be like, okay, whatever. I don't think it should be that way at all. So yeah, that's actually the biggest change in my quote unquote relationship with money is just understanding it from a very like meta business level, and then thinking about taxes and accounting and making sure that things work properly. And, you could just see the sheer amount that things cost. Most people have no idea. You've never thought about rent in your life, about what the office that you're sitting in, the rent that's being paid in your building. Most people, when they walk into their office, are like, whatever, I'm just going to my office. You don't know what goes into that, and about insurance and workers' comp and like all this other stuff, health insurance and the different types of insurance and HSA plans, all these. So really what it is I've just appreciated like the genuine complexity of life.
Last question I will ask you is, like 2024 is coming up, and you said, like a lot of new people found breaking points post Israel. What do you want them to expect from the show right now?
For 2024?
Yeah.
I just want you to be able to come here and take away anything that you want to know and or think you need to know. So if you want to do polls, we'll do polls. If you want deep dives into policy, we'll do that. If you want nitty gritty about horse race stuff, we'll do that too. I love it all. We'll have it all for you. It is a one-stop shop. You want on the ground, we'll have some of that too. You want a focus group to hear what people are saying, we can have some of that. You want to talk about the dumbest controversy or the smartest ones? We will have it all. That's kind of how I think.
I want to close it on like this one thing, which is obviously like I worked with you at Collar, and when I moved to the States, I was like, it was 2017. It was like post, like I just moved I did grad school in London, and like so like I came up through like the British education system, and like I was kind of like coming out of like that way of thinking, and coming to the Collar and meeting people in the quote unquote right or whatever, that kind of like influenced my way of thinking. Working with you and also like just watching you as an audience, that kind of definitely influenced like my way of thinking.
Good.
And I don't know, there's no question here. Just want to say like thank you, I guess, for that.
Well, thanks,
so, like,
man.
Yeah, cool.
You're an integral part of our team. So I appreciate it.